2023-24 that all the schools in the university should promote the use of AI technology and its application in many modes. The School of Computer Science and Engineering has come forward to support the university in the implementation of AI in student projects of all kinds and at all levels. The following steps will be followed for implementing AI for all. Research projects in multidisciplinary universities such as Galgotias University that involves creating an inclusive and comprehensive approach to integrate artificial intelligence in education, research, and applications across various disciplines. Establish AI research support, identify research opportunities, foster collaborative research, provide training and workshop, data access and management, knowledge access and collaboration platforms, industry and community partnership, evaluation and recognition, and fixing plagiarism issues. By implementing these strategies, a multidisciplinary university can create a supportive ecosystem that promotes AI integration in research projects across various disciplines. This approach enables researchers to harness the potential of AI to address complex research challenges, drive innovation, and generate meaningful insights that benefit the society as a whole. To comprehend this initiative, Galgotias University extends a warm welcome to our distinguished guest, Mr. Rahul Kayala. Mr. Rahul Kayala is a graduate from the prestigious Georgia Institute of Technology, Atlanta. He is currently a product manager at MoveWorks, an AI unicorn based in San Francisco. He leads a team building an AI product using cutting-edge models like GPT-4. Prior to this, Mr. Rahul was on the founding team of Microsoft Teams and scaled Teams during its hyper-growth phase from 0 to 75 million users. He also helped build the first version of Siri from Rahul is an active angel investor and product advisor to several enterprise AI companies based in US and India. I request our Honorable Director of Operation, Ms. Aradhana Galgotia Madam, to please come on stage and felicitate our guest of honor, Mr. Rahul Kayala. All of you, please join your hands for Mr. Rahul Kayala and Aradhana Madam. Rizvi, please do stay on stage. This is a charming boy. His name is Mr. H. Rizvi, and he is the co-MC of this event. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Well, now I request our distinguished guest, the young and dynamic Mr. Rahul Kayala, to please stay on stage and take over the session. All faculty members to please keep their questions ready because Rizvi is going to take the Q&A session after the end of the talk. Thank you so much and please take over.
All right, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Out there in the back? Awesome. Slide check on the next slide. All right, how's everybody doing today? Good? Energetic? Sleepy? I just had a great lunch, so I'm sleepy. I don't know about you. No? All excited? All right. Thank you so much for having me here, Aradhana ma'am, Renu ma'am, Vice Chancellor sir, and all of the distinguished faculty, heads of departments, and students here. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Rahul. Despite what the MC told you, I'm very approachable, so you can come talk to me about anything. I've had the fortune of working at several cutting edge companies and working on several cutting edge products. So I'm here to share some of those learnings with everybody here today. So very excited. Thank you so much for having me. All right, a quick introduction to myself. So, like I said, my name is Rahul. So I right now work at a company called MoveWorks. So we use enterprise AI models. So like all the models that you've heard of more recently, like ChatGPT, GPT-4, all of these large language models to solve enterprise problems. So the first problem that we started working on was solving IT support. So when you have a problem with technology, let's say you're using your laptop and something doesn't work, today you go file a ticket and you have a human help you. So we started working on automating that problem because that's a very common problem. Every single one of us here has run into it at some point or the other. We've raised an IT ticket and we've waited hours and hours. And what we've done at MoveWorks is automate majority of that with AI. Before MoveWorks, I worked at Microsoft. I worked on this product called Microsoft Teams, which is our messaging and meeting solution. I'm sure many of you have probably used it in some flavor or form, especially during the pandemic. So I led some of the core teams at Microsoft Teams, building some of the messaging as well as the meetings functionality. So, and by the time I left Microsoft, Teams had grown from about 0 users. So it was literally just my team and I using it to like about 100 million users. So that's nearly like 1,000 crore people kind of using this. To at this point right now, we're at about 300 million active users using Teams. So what's been exciting is seeing how these global scale products get built. It's built by people that look just like you and I. Like, so it doesn't take a special kind of genius to go after these problems. What it requires is you to focus on the most important problem for a user and going and building something capable for a couple of topics. We'll talk about large language models. You might have heard some of these terms, especially since November of last year after ChatGPT came out. It took the world by storm. So we'll talk a little bit about large language models. We'll talk about how you can build effective applications on top of it. What are the interesting use cases? And then we'll talk about some interesting applications across a variety of departments here. So we'll spend some time talking through how it can apply to, say, computer science, the most obvious cases, to even more complex cases like law or pharma, how generative AI and large language models can play a big role. So let's get started. All right, so how many of you here have used TikTok before it was banned? Instagram before it was, I guess Instagram is still allowed. So how many of you here have used WhatsApp? I'm sure pretty much everybody. Instagram, YouTube, pretty much. What has been very interesting to see is if you look at some of these stats, this chart is telling you how long it took each of these applications to reach 100 million users, right? So we're looking at, say, Uber, which I know lots of people use. You also use Ola. It took Uber 70 months to get to about 100 million users. It took Instagram 30 months to get to that mark. And then had TikTok, took the world by storm. I think it literally was, nobody was using TikTok and everybody you talked to was using TikTok and then everybody was making a TikTok. That was 9 months. In November of 2022, last year, ChatGPT came out. Right? It took the world by storm because in 2 months, they went from 0 to 100 million users. It's the fastest growing consumer application in the history of mankind until about 2 weeks ago when Instagram launched Threads, which is their Twitter competitor, and then that took it over like about a month. But with leaving Threads aside, ChatGPT was still one of the biggest wins in consumer products in the recent times. And the reason is very simple. How many here have you used How many people here have used ChatGPT in some form or shape? Okay. The reason, at least my reason why I really liked using it was so versatile, it was so simple. You go into that website, it's a chat box, you can ask it any question, it'll give you a reasonable answer, you can ask another question and have a nice conversation with it. And that's how most people have interacted with ChatGPT. Some people consider it a friend, some people think of it as a therapist, some people actually do useful things with it, so it's a wide spectrum of different use cases. What I've been building over the last couple of years is foundationally the same thing. So ChatGPT was the first consumer version of what we call a large language model. It's called large because it has a lot of input training text that goes into it. It's a language model because it's working on text and language. And then it's a model because it's an AI situation. So let's talk about what these specifically are. At the core of it, large language models are essentially doing one simple task. Given a sentence or a word, all they're doing is predicting the next word. So, for example, in this case, if the sentence is I woke up, got dressed, and made a, all this model is doing is predicting the next word. Now, does anybody want to take a guess? Coffee? I hear coffee. And breakfast, okay? So these are all valid statements, right? You can make a coffee, you can make a breakfast. You woke up, you got dressed, and you made a new TikTok video, for example. There are infinite possibilities in terms of how this sentence can be completed. So what large language models do is they take all of the input training text that they have. So for example, with GPT, that is the model that powers OpenAI's ChatGPT, that has been trained on nearly 500 gigabytes of text, which is a lot of data, right? So in this case, for example, it's found a whole bunch of different ways to complete this. For example, somebody's made a smoothie, somebody's made a cup of coffee, somebody's made a plan for the day, right? So that's essentially what large language models are doing. So when you go to ChatGPT and you ask it a question, all it's doing infinite times, multiple times, over and over and over and over, is it predicts the next word, then it predicts the word after that, then the word after that. And that's how it's making a sentence. And the way it chooses which words come next is based on what's gone into it. So if it has trained on medical literature, it can give you a lot of text about medical, medical conditions. If it's trained on legal text, then it can give you an explanation of a specific law. If it's trained on code, like C++ or Java, or like you've trained it on the entire open source code base, it can predict the next piece of code it needs to write. That is the essence of it, how large language models work. It's so simple that when researchers started using large language models to start having conversations with them, they were surprised. They didn't know why it was able to have a conversation with you, why it was able to follow instructions so well. So when you tell ChatGPT, for example, you are an excellent YouTube video creator, give me a script for why Galgotias University is the #1 university, it can actually give you a very good solid script because it has been trained on so much data, but nobody understands fundamentally why that's happening. It's because all it's been trained on is predicting the next word, but once you've done it on such a large scale, it's able to display some reasoning capabilities. And the way, this is, for example, what you're seeing here is the architecture of one of these models. And this is a very simple model. This is a model called BERT, right? When it came out in 2016, it was a large language model. By today's standards, it is anything but a large language model. Today, you would call it cute because it has only 5 million parameters, right? So what this is doing is it's taking all of that input text and translating it into this series of numbers called embeddings. And it's composing them into a set of different layers that are encoders and decoders. And that, essentially what happens is once you've trained this and you've created this architecture, once you put in a sentence, it goes through this flow and then uses the embeddings to figure out what the next word should be. To give you a sense of how powerful today's models are, take a look at the model on the left. That is 2017. So it's about 0.05 billion parameters. A parameter is basically a number, right, or an embedding. So you take a bunch of text, you translate it down to a particular number, right? So if you see the Google Transformer architecture, which changed the whole world of AI as we know it today, that had about 0.05 billion. What you saw with ChatGPT is the OpenAI GPT-3 model. That's about 170 billion parameters, and now that's already outdated. GPT-4 and a couple of other models are significantly more powerful. This essentially means every time you see an increase in parameters, you see the model able to reason and connect the dots in a way that humans can't. So the bigger the model, the more effective it is at answering your questions, the more effective it is at following your instructions, and the more effective it gets at reasoning across various different domains together. So if you see, this is like how models have been evolving over time. You see on the left here, you have a small set of models that took off in about 2018 over what they call the encoder-decoder architecture. On the right, you see the most successful architecture here, which is decoders only. And you see a significant explosion of the variety of different models. Okay. So you see, for example, GPT, GPT-3, Cloud, Palm by Google, Bard by Google, which you can go use, Llama by Meta, which is formerly Facebook. They're all significantly innovating on creating new models. So these models are what most people in the industry refer to as foundational models. So they are trained on large amounts of text, but the researchers who are training them typically do not have a purpose for the model. So they're training it to create a really large architecture, and these models can take an instruction and give you an output. So that's what they're doing. They're training it to be general purpose. But you can also fine-tune some of these models. You can take a large foundational model, and then you can give it specific domains of text. So let's say you want to build ChatGPT for healthcare. So you want it to train on all medical literature, for example. So you can fine-tune an existing large language model with medical literature, and then have it answer specific questions. So when you come into it and ask it a question like, hey, I have a fever, what do I do today to go solve that? It can give you a more specific answer than when you go to ChatGPT, because it has been trained more specifically on that. It can also ask you more questions to understand what this fever is about. Do you have other symptoms, like do you have a cough or do you have a cold, to perform a better diagnosis. So you have a large set of tech companies, for example, who are training foundational models with no specific purpose. And then you have another collection of startups who are taking these foundational models and training them to suit their specific purpose. So we'll take a couple of examples in terms of how we can take a large language model or a foundational model that one of these large companies have built and go through a couple of examples in terms of how you can go build it. So the interesting thing is you're seeing a ChatGPT for every piece of software coming out today, because it is so easy to take those foundational models and then customize them and integrate them into your own application. So for example, you have Slack, which is a popular messaging application. They have a version of GPT that's built into the product. You have products like Informatica or Tableau, for example, that have integrated GPT into the product. Because all they're doing is taking that foundational model that, say, somebody else has built, training it with their subset of data, and then integrating it into their application. And the value here comes from building a co-pilot or an assistant. So as a user is using this piece of software, it helps them answer questions. It helps them do specific tasks for them. For example, Microsoft announced a very compelling co-pilot, which does everything from writing Word documents for you. So for example, you can go to Word, ask the Microsoft Copilot to generate a nice lengthy letter based on another document, based on another email. Or you can go to Outlook, it can automatically write emails for you. So that's how they've taken some of these ChatGPT based models and like integrated it deeply into their applications. And you're seeing more and more of these every single day. And that's because the pace of innovation has significantly stepped up. So let's talk about a couple of use cases, right? So let's say you want to go build one of these co-pilots for your own use case, or take one of these large language models that somebody's built. How do you actually think about integrating that into your own piece of software? So it all depends on how much time you have and how much investment you want to make. You have everything from what I call level 1 to level 4, right? On level 1, you have very simple applications of large language models. So for example, let's say you have a large piece of text. Somebody sent you a voice note on WhatsApp, you don't want to listen to it, right? You can have ChatGPT summarize that for you, right? So that's a very simple use case, right? You might have a lot of emails that are coming in. You want somebody, instead of asking a human to write down a summary for you, you can have GPT generate that summary for you. So these are pretty simple use cases. So I call them level 1 because all they involve is a simple input in and input out. Then you have level 2 use cases. This is where it gets a little bit more complex. So you might have legal documents. For example, you might have your property deed or a contract. Now, when you have to summarize a contract, you can do a generic summary which says this is a contract and these are the people who are transacting and that's it. But to make that summary useful, you need to have domain knowledge. So when you go to a paralegal or a lawyer or a lawyer's assistant, that's what they're doing. They're reading through the document and the contract and finding the specific things that you need to know to instead of having to read the entire document. So these are level 3 use cases because they require expertise. So they need you to do some additional work on top of the large language model. Maybe by training it with specific use cases, by doing something called prompt engineering. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. So that way it gets a little bit more complicated. Then you have level 3 use cases. Again, this takes more scope of investment and time. For example, let's take a sales team, right? A sales team gets a call from a customer. They want to go buy a piece of software or a car, right? Now, if there's an AI agent instead of a human on the other side, they need to understand who this customer is. They need to understand what they're buying. They need to figure out how to follow up with this customer. They need to know what all you've told the customer previously. Maybe you've given them a discount. You need to go honor that. So that's when it gets a little bit more complicated because there are multiple steps, multiple types of information involved. So that's why it's a level 3 use case. So let's say you want to build an AI agent that automatically does sales for you, then it becomes very, very complex. Then you have level 4 use cases, which are completely, entirely end-to-end autonomous monitoring. So let's say we'll take an example of security or security monitoring. Today, you have CCTV cameras everywhere, right? But to know what's happening, and you want a human to stay alert and like monitor every single one of those feeds to know whether an intruder has come in or somebody else has gone out, so on and so forth. And then typically, let's say you have one at the security gate, the intruder is not the only one who's coming in, right? You have legitimate people who are passing through back and forth as well. If you have to build an AI agent who can understand the difference between a legitimate user as well as an intruder, while both of them are passing through seamlessly, that's a level 4 use case, where it requires a whole different level of reasoning and understanding, which is possible today because of the advances of these models, but require a lot of investment. So there are some companies and startups in the US that are doing extremely well that do automated monitoring for security. So all they have is intelligent cameras on a premises, and AI can detect when they see abnormal or anomalous activity. So when they see somebody coming to a door that they do not recognize, or they see somebody who is tampering with, say, the door or locks and external security, they can raise an alert and send the police there within like a minute or two. So you're seeing that as an autonomous, entirely end-to-end. On the level of investment and the complexity of what you want to build, you have these different levels of investment you need to make. So for the purpose of this session today, let's stick to a level 1 use case. Let's take something that's simple, easy to understand, and we'll touch a little bit upon level 2 as part of the example. All right, so let's talk about a level 1 Copilot. So in this case, let's take an example of writing a job description, right? So now let's say you have to write a job description for a data analyst, right? So you're a software company that's based in Bangalore, you want to hire a data scientist for your team. What would you do? As a human, I would go look up 3 to 4 websites to see other data analyst positions, copy some of those requirements, then go back to my CEO or whoever's hiring, the hiring manager for that role, and then put together some of the requirements based on those websites, then review it with my CEO, and then have them approve the job description before I put it out. Right? Nobody's really coming up with something original for like the job description anyway, because the majority of the times it's already written. So let's think about how we can use AI to kind of build that. So in this case, right, all you'll need is some sort of a large language model that's hosted somewhere. So Azure, for example, has these models that you can get as an API. OpenAI also has an API where you can access some of these models. And all you need in terms of the investment there is simply just a subscription to that API. And it's just really cheap. Majority of the times, like every single call that you make to these APIs is like 1/10 of a paisa or something like that. So it's really, really cheap to kind of use this. All you need is just a credit card to get started, right? And you don't need that much coding expertise as well. We'll talk about some of the use cases where you can use GPT-4 or GPT to write code for you. So you can ask it nicely to write the code as well to do the task for you. So you don't need that much developer kind of resources. All you really need is what we call prompt engineering. So we'll talk about that in more detail, but a quick teaser. Prompt engineering, all it means is specifying very clearly what you want the model to do for you. So this is the example that we're talking about. So we're talking about writing a job description, right? So as a user, you'll come in and you say, hey, I need to go generate a job listing for a data analyst. The prompt that you as a developer need to write to use a large language model like OpenAI's GPT-3 is this simple. You're a highly experienced job description writer. Your goal is to write job descriptions that attract candidates. Be professional and to the point. And the instruction is, I need you to generate a job description for a data analyst. I'm using an off-the-shelf model, one that you can just access today without any developer resources or background. You can use OpenAI's GPT-3 or GPT-4 and then be able to generate a job description that pretty much is 90% there. All you need to do is probably add your company's address and like an email address and then put it up on your website. It's that simple. What large language models have done is taken away or rather, for a majority of people, they've made English the programming language. So you don't need to know C, C++, Java, Python, all of these things. For simple level 1 use cases, it literally comes down to how good your English is. In fact, at my company, like I was telling Aradhana earlier today, we hire machine learning engineers from the best universities in the world, like think Stanfords and Harvards and CMUs. They're all, now instead of buying machine learning books, they buy thesauruses because they need to know English effectively to like teach these models how to like respond. So all you need is that prompt, and it's able to generate an effective job description. And imagine all the different ways you can use this. You can use this to create intern postings. You can use this to create blog posts for your website, right? Because these models have been trained on so much data, they are able to simply accomplish these tasks. Let's take a different use case. This is the level 2 use case I was talking about, which is more complex. It's the legal department use case. Now, legal departments are interesting because they need to be factual, right? In the previous case, a data analyst, you might ask him to do, or her, to do a variety of tasks. Some of them, like if the job description is a little not factual, it's okay, because the risk is low. Whereas, let's say you're going to an AI lawyer to get your advice, you want to make sure that advice is factual. So this is where it gets more complicated. That's where you would want to train it on some historical data. So in this case, for example, you might want to train it on the previous legal cases, specific briefings or documents that you've created previously, or even like specific, questions and answers that users or like clients have had with lawyers back and forth. So this will ground the model. So you have the foundational large language model, then you've grounded it with domain specific data. So then when you go to the model and ask it a question like this, so can you provide me an analysis of the application of the business judgment rule in corporate law? It can give you a very specific answer. It can tell you that the business judgment rule is a legal principle in corporate law that does blah, blah, blah. So in the prompt, you will say, you are an excellent lawyer. Given all of this additional data about specific laws, answer user questions, be professional and to the point, you're able to get like a very clear answer. Now, of course, training it on these types of data is a little bit more complex and more involved, requires the ability to use multiple APIs and also use multiple databases to store some of these data as well. So it's a little bit more complex than the earlier use case, but it is very doable. You can get to a really well-functioning level 2 type of use case within about a month's worth of effort, which is really fast. Being able to do this even a year ago would take you years and years. So that's the level at which AI is advanced today. So let's talk about prompts. So this is, if there is one thing that I would recommend all the students here, and in fact, even everybody here to learn, is learn the art of prompt engineering. So tomorrow, the successful professionals are ones that will know how to talk to AI and get it to give you the outputs that matter to you. So a prompt, for like at a very, very high level, all it is a set of detailed instructions that you're giving to the language model for it to perform the tasks that you want it to perform. So let's say in that earlier case, we wanted it to write a data analyst job description. The prompt was very simple. It was literally, you're an experienced job description writer. I want you to go write a prompt about this. Be professional, use this language, don't use that. It is not rocket science. You just need to know what you want specifically, right? So that's what prompt engineering is. I use ChatGPT all the time for work, all the time. So I use it to prototype ideas. So I go in and I give it a prompt, I have it create a particular task, then I give it to my engineering team to go build that out in a production system. I've seen lawyers in my team use it to like summarize large documents. I've seen my security team use it with a simple effective prompt because they don't want to read 200 pages. They only want to read like the 5 paragraphs that are bad that they need to focus on. So learning how to do prompt engineering is super, super important. And a prompt simply consists of this. It consists of instructions. So in this case, what we're doing is we're giving a prompt that classifies the sentiment of a sentence. So given a sentence, let's say I think the food was okay, can we classify that into positive, negative, neutral? The prompt here is very simple. The instruction is classify the text into neutral, negative, or positive. You give an example, right? You give an input data and an output indicator, and the model is able to take this and give you the output that you want. So there is one skill that everybody should invest in learning. It is prompt engineering. It is effectively learning to write good English in paragraphs and have somebody follow instructions. So if you think about it, like all the effective managers that you've ever worked with or you aspire to be, they are prompt engineers, but for humans. What we're learning to do is doing the same thing, but for AI models. Okay. So I've talked on this point enough, so we'll move on. But yeah, it's important for your success. Prompting is an art. There are better prompt engineers than others, but the only way you'll get there is by practicing. So let's talk about, so that was just to give you a preview of how you can build these applications at a very, very high level. But let's talk about specific applications. This is where it gets fun. Let's talk about computer science. One of the biggest applications of large language models for computer science and engineering is the ability to write code. You can literally ask it, or go to ChatGPT today. If you want, you can do it on your phones. You can ask it to write you the code for a web application that sells perfumes on the internet. And it's able to give you very specific code that if you copy paste into a browser will work to that key. So like generating code is one of the biggest applications for large language models, which if you think about it, fundamentally makes sense, right? Language, human language is very complex. It has nuances, you need to understand it. Computer languages are very specific, formal. They have a very rigid set of grammar. So if a model can understand human language well, it can very, very well understand programming languages. And that's why you see this as the biggest use case, where you have lots of applications where people are generating code automatically from scratch, and they're able to go build an application, let's say a mobile app or a web app, in hours instead of weeks or months at this point. In fact, GitHub, right, the big company that does open source repositories, they launched something called GitHub Copilot a while back. And they're seeing massive success from all of the users that use GitHub Copilot. 46% of the code that was written was by AI. So that's a huge amount. Nearly half of the code that's written by users who use GitHub Copilot is AI written. And majority of users say their time to write code has significantly gotten faster, like nearly about 50 to 60% faster. A lot of you might also know Stack Overflow. That's where everybody goes when you run into a problem, right? So why is this not working? Why is this not debugging? Everybody uses ChatGPT for that now instead. You can go paste that error message. You will get back a very specific answer as to why this error is occurring. It'll give you debug instructions. If you paste the code, it'll tell you exactly where the line is or where the error is and why this is occurring. It'll even offer to fix it for you. That's how powerful ChatGPT is, especially when it comes to code. And the result is for like traffic to Stack Overflow, which is a massive website that every programmer goes to, is down by 14%. That is huge. That means like nearly like if you have 100 people, 10 people stop going to Stack Overflow altogether because they find value elsewhere. They don't need it. They don't need a human to like tell me what the error is, then you go try it, then you go see if it works, and then go to another Stack Overflow post. When instead you're going to AI, and AI is telling you exactly what to change. So that's how powerful it gets. Let's talk about business analysts. Now, this is one of those things where you should try to believe it. If you go to ChatGPT, OpenAI, and upload a CSV file of your data or an Excel file of your data, you can ask it questions about your data. For example, I uploaded a file that's a real screenshot, and I'm able to ask it questions. I said, give me a list of all the particular roles and their top applications, for example. And it was like a data set or a CSV with like nearly 1,000 rows with like 10 columns, right? Normally, if I have to go get that data, I have to go create like 20 different pivot tables to go create that view for me. And then in the process, I would have gone to some 5 YouTube videos to figure out how to like get a pivot table working. Right? Now I don't have to do any of that. All I did was uploaded that into ChatGPT, and I was able to ask questions. It also creates charts for you. I can ask it to create a chart for the most popular role over time, and it's able to create a chart for me. So business analysis and business intelligence is another one of those areas where it can get extremely compelling to use AI to significantly speed up the process. So whenever you have any data analysis task, you can use AI to like identify the specific slice of data that's interesting, go one level deeper, ask repetitive questions, and you can do this in the form of a conversation. So you don't need to know what you're looking for. You can ask it questions and keep asking more questions on top of that, and you'll be able to find your insights from data. So this is super interesting in terms of an application as well. So like business analysis and business intelligence overall. We're also seeing lots of cases where McKinsey consultants or McKinsey consultants or Boston Consulting Group, these are like highly paid consultants who go work with different CEOs. They feel like their jobs can be replaced because of how effective AI is at these points. They're able to create multiple scenarios, for example. You can tell it, what if my sales doubles by 20%? How would that, what is the forecast then? Or if I set a goal of increasing my revenue by 30%, what are the variables I need to go change to go make that happen? And GPT is able to kind of give you a very specific answer based on doing those what-if scenario analysis, which, if you think about it, is what these expensive consultants do to the board. So you're seeing a lot of power that's harnessed in these models. Let's talk about architecture. So we all talked about, until now, we mostly talked about text. But large language models and more generally generative models can create images as well. So you might have seen some of this with like DALL-E and Midjourney and Stability. Some people might have played around with like creating some AI images or AI art on their own. Architecture is one of those really specific, interesting use cases as well, where you can ask it to create specific concepts and sketches. You can say, hey, I'm trying to build a 5-bedroom house here in Greater Noida, and I want it to be Vastu compliant and also have these 3 elements with a waterfall. And it's able to give you a plan because it has been trained on every other plan that there is no humanity. And it can localize it based on certain factors because you can go read the weather in Greater Noida. It's generally warmer and hotter here. So you want things that are more open and ventilative. You can also use this for presentations and visualizations. So one of the big problems that lots of people, for example, I'll give you, this is a very interesting example. So this is Adobe Firefly. It's a new product that they announced, where this entire image has been generated with AI. So a person, all they ended up doing was like, took a picture of this seashore, drew a box, and said, I want a modern minimalist house in the early morning, and it's able to generate that for you. So that's how compelling it is. One of the other interesting problems in architecture and real estate is interior design, right? In lots of cases, when you move into a house, it's empty, and you have to hire an interior designer. Or if you're very creative, then you know exactly what types of furniture you need. But imagine if you can take a picture of your space, put some constraints, and have an AI model generate a furniture plan for you. And that's possible today. This is a process that they call virtual staging, especially in common in the US when you put up a house for rent or for sale. People don't want to, studies have proven that when they look at empty houses, they don't like it. Versus when you see houses with furniture, they can imagine themselves living in it. So the conversion rates of people who want to rent it and buy it go up. So today, lots of people end up spending thousands of dollars to buy furniture for a showing so that they can take pictures. Then they, of course, return it. But now with AI, you can create some of these pictures automatically. So if you see, the picture on the left and the right are the same. With the exception on the right, you have furniture that's been placed there by AI. And now what I can do is, let's say if it's somebody who has a very eclectic style, they like lots of gold and all of those things, I can go create an image of furniture just for them. Whereas if it's somebody who likes minimalistic furniture, I can create an image just for them. So now I can infinitely create as many real estate or for rent pages that are custom made for the person who's coming and viewing it. So therefore, I can increase my business value. So it's not just about creating something that's cool, but it's also about driving real money because now you can go customize it infinitely. Let's also talk about mechanical and civil engineering. This is super cool. So if you see the image on the right, that's again an AI model that's taken a structural drawing. So in this case, it's a building that's in New York, and it's able to identify the structural strength. It's able to identify the airflow, the light flow, the heating and the cooling, essentially from uploading the model. And you can use this to create very effective structural designs that take into account the local geography, that take into account constraints that you have in building codes and legal things as well. So you might see mechanical engineers going forward using something like using a tool like GPT to create the first version of structural design. Then they use their expertise to validate the fact that this is actually correct, make some changes, bring the creative element to it. But now they've gone from doing one structural design, say in a month or 2 months, to like managing 10 at a time. So that engineer who's able to use this effectively has become 10 times more productive and 10 times more valuable than somebody who does not. So that's the power of these models in these types of domains. Let's also talk about hospitality and tourism. That's an interesting space. The image that we see on the right, that is a live product. You can go try it out today. It's called Plan by Ixigo. Ixigo, as you know, is like the famous travel provider here, or like the booking website like Make My Trip. They have a chatbot now that you can go ask it to create itineraries for you. So in this case, we started off by asking for a mountain retreat in Manali, and I can like go into the chat box and ask it to change things up. I said, maybe give me a 2-day itinerary instead of a 4-day or a 3-day. And without too much walking, because my parents and my grandmother are with me. And it's able to change the entire itinerary based on that. Normally with Manali, you would probably do a little bit of hiking, do all those things. Now it's completely changes to like entirely like a boating and like food-based itinerary just based on that prompt. What is powerful here is it can go do these things on the fly, right? So normally if you had to go do this, you had to go read 10 blog posts, watch 5 YouTube videos, spend like 2-3 hours of your time to go get this level of fidelity, whereas now it's entirely streamlined. Another common use case is talking to customer support. So let's say your flight gets delayed. Now you spend hours and hours waiting on the phone to talk to a human, right? Imagine if you have an effective chatbot that's able to get you the resolution that you need, which is either move you onto a different flight or give you some compensation, give you a meal voucher while you're waiting at the airport. So chatbots are able to do that effectively, like the ones that you see here, because they can respond to what you're saying and they're not hard-coded compared to previous times. Another interesting use case in the tourism space is also linguistic diversity. So you might have different people that speak different languages. So let's say you are in Manali and you create a brochure for your hotel. You probably create it in English and Hindi because those are the 2 languages that most people speak and you know about. But now with GPT, you can translate that to every language. Right? You can go ask even to like Korean or like Japanese for that one tourist who comes your way. Right? This is useful because it means that when you can reach more people will be more interested in coming to your hotel and staying there. So it can create more economic opportunities if you think about using this the right way. We'll also talk about law. We talked about some interesting use cases there, but there are some startups in the US that are super new that essentially are building AI lawyers. Not so much as like an AI that's a lawyer, but more like providing assistance to lawyers as they're creating briefs. So I know lots of lawyers tend to create lots of policy documents, briefs, they create filings that go into the high courts and the Supreme Courts. A majority of them are based on certain facts, right? As long as you give AI these facts, it's able to create the specific filings. Now, the other thing that you can also do is once you have a filing, you can sanity check it. So you can read through the filing and tell you, hey, you're missing these 3 things. Or this argument does not make sense because of this previous case law. Or you're going up in front of the Supreme Court and they like citing other Supreme Court judges instead of like High Court. So like, can you change your brief to keep that in mind? Can give you those types of advice, which might be very hard for a senior to do in the space. There's also another huge set of use cases around compliance. The number of forms that people have to fill because they're an incorporated company is massive, right? So as long as you are a registered director here in India or even in the US, you have lots of compliance documents you need to keep filling over and over again. And all of that is the same information. It's just asked in a different way, right? Instead of saying name, they'll say first name. Now you can build an AI model that can go automate a lot of this compliance for you. We'll also talk about pharma. Pharma is another interesting one where there's a lot of compliance, again, in terms of creating disclosures, creating filings with the appropriate standard bodies like FDA, for example, right? So in this case, what you can have AI do is generate some of these drug discovery reports and generate these compliance reports automatically, because a lot of these reports are based on underlying research, which researchers are doing. So you have like a team of large numbers of people that are creating these reports. You can have AI do the first step. It'll get you 50 or 60% there, and then you have your team fill that out, which means you can reduce the time. Let's say you have a successful trial for your medicine. Instead of waiting 5 to 6 months to go get it through regulatory approval, you can cut that time down because now you have AI kind of helping you and accelerating that process. What's also interesting is you can start designing clinical trial protocols effectively as well. So you can read the latest research and literature on how to design an effective clinical trial. You can read similar drugs and what the trial procedures look like for them, and then recommend a suggested plan for you. So that's another type of administrative task that most researchers do not have the time to do. They just go based on their experience. But now you have an AI assistant who can do that for you, compile that, present it for you. It's up to you whether you choose to accept the recommendation or not. Also, another interesting thing is as a trial is underway or as a drug has made it to the market, lots of pharma companies spend millions of dollars trying to listen for customer feedback, right? You don't want to know if there are any side effects. Also, what AI can do is like analyze all of these channels. It can listen to like all of the social media channels, can listen to all the TikToks that people are making about these side effects, and like highlight the most important things for you to do automatically. This is an extremely slow process today. Usually what tends to happen is there's a court case somewhere, that's the first time the pharma company hears about it. But now you can like have AI do the proactive listening for you, so you can choose that, hey, there's a big problem with this drug, let's stop it. Or there's a side effect that we did not know about, so let's change our instructions to the doctors in terms of how they prescribe it. So there are ways in which you can proactively stem some of these problems. Also talk about management. I know some part of it we talked about during the data analysis or the business analyst phase, but a very interesting use case is about employee coaching. I've used this a lot as well. So for example, every time I have to go talk to some of my team members, and I know, for example, one of my team members is motivated by working on really hard problems. And when I have to give him hard feedback, it's very, like normally I would say the way that's comfortable to me, which is very directly, right? But not everybody responds to that. So what I did instead was I went to ChatGPT and I said, hey, there's a person on my team. I want to communicate this fact to him. He is motivated by X, Y, and Z, and I know if it's delivered the right way, he'll take that into his stride. ChatGPT came back with a very nice paragraph that I took notes of and then delivered, and it landed effectively well. What could have been a 45-minute conversation of that person being defensive, saying, no, you do not know, this is why it doesn't work, or you have no idea, this feedback doesn't make sense, landed really well because I understood his motivations, I understood what I wanted to say, I asked this AI tool to be objective and tell me exactly how I should phrase it to them, and was able to have an effective conversation. Another friend of mine who runs a factory in the US, he used ChatGPT for a similar purpose as well. There, it's a very uniquely US problem where people have guns all over the place, right? So one of the worries that they have when they let go of workers or they fire workers is that worker might get very angry and come back with a gun and shoot you. So you have no idea, so people are very, very afraid of giving bad news, especially because that's a real problem. So in this case, he went to ChatGPT to do the same thing. He said, hey, this is the nature of the worker. he can get angry at certain times. I want to give him this feedback, and we have to let him know that he's no longer welcome here. And AI was able to draft him a simple message that he read out. Well, he's still alive to tell the tale, so I guess it worked. But that's another interesting one where you're seeing a lot of use cases where AI can be objective when we as humans cannot be, and you can use it to give you advice on how to have certain tough conversations with people. So definitely when you're negotiating with your employers, or you're looking for a new job, or you're talking to your manager or your boss, or even like you run into a very important person. Let's say you run into Modi ji in an elevator. It's very unlikely you would know he's there. But like, what would you say to him in that 10 seconds? Like, AI can help you frame that very quickly. All right, so that's all the different applications that I have. So I'll pause here for any questions.
Thank you so much for your impeccable talk. And before beginning the Q&A, I want you to make yourself comfortable. Please have some water. And I request if you allow me to have a chair for you on the center of the stage. Yeah, please get a chair. Okay, Rizvi, ready? Please buckle up your shoes. You have to run around the back of the stage, and I'll take care of the front rows. Okay? So, are we ready? Yes, ma'am.
Firstly, Rahul, thank you for such an insightful talk, and I really like how you have really simplified very technical aspects. So, what I want to ask is, in your personal opinion, do you think, since you working very closely and actively with AI tools, uh, will this in future hamper creative intellect? What is your opinion on that?
It's a very interesting question. Thank you for that question. Thank you for the kind words. I think it definitely will. If we like, the premise of the question is super valid, right? Which is what AI is doing today is looking at the 500 or 1,000 years of human knowledge, distilling it down and applying it to various different use cases. We're seeing some applications of creativity. For example, if you go to especially tools like Midjourney that generate images, you definitely see certain images that are very creative that a human may not have come up with, but it's still some variant of what already exists. So my thinking is, with the rise in AI, I actually think it's going to push humans to be significantly more creative. So for example, I heard a studio at Netflix, what they are using GPT for is they have a script, they ask GPT to come up with 10 endings based on that script, right? So like GPT is going to go to a particular script, give you ending 1, ending 2, ending 3, ending 10. What they're doing, the way they're using it is they're not going to use any of the 10 endings. Their brief to their writers is, you need to come up with an ending that's not in any of these endings. So in a way, what they're doing is they're using it as a way to figure out what is the common creativity, what will people guess, and now I need to go one up them and figure out something that's significantly better. So there are ways in which you can use this tool to boost creative intellect, but in the majority of cases, if you use AI directly without applying your mind on top of the output, it can result in everybody sounding the same, everybody sounding robotic, everybody sounding a little dull, for example.
Thank you, Rahul, for a wonderful talk. It was deep in content and simple in delivery that a non-technical person like me understood and listened spellbound from very beginning to the end. Now, you already actually answered my question, but since you gave me the mic, I might as well speak a little. As you said, you've got to apply your own intelligence, and a chat box, for example, is going to be increasing the creativity of people. It will in industries that you mentioned, the film industry, or etc. But for an average person, for example, I'll tell you about myself. I was drafting some letters to be sent out and asked a couple of colleagues to do the same. I got identical letters from everyone. And I just had to tell them, this is ChatGPT. Maybe you could do something about it. But having said that, this problem is going to happen. There will be a lot of universities who need to send out the same information, and so all of us will have similar letters going up. And so what do you think will happen in this case?
No,
It's already happening for schools, students getting overwork done, etc. So how do you solve this problem?
It's definitely a very real problem. I was listening to a talk by Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, and he was asked a very similar question. And he says maybe in some cases, like people will evolve social norms around it. So maybe, because I care about you, ma'am, I will only send you a handwritten email. Whereas, to my dad, I would send him a ChatGPT written email, for example. Right? So it depends on, So people will evolve social norms to meet that use case. But you're right. I think fundamentally, like these models, are as good as the prompt they're given, right? So if you give it a generic prompt saying write an article or write a letter marketing this university, it's only going to give you that level of output. But if you get more specific, you said, hey, I'm targeting students in the country of Nigeria. I want you to go tailor it for them. I want you to highlight these facts. This is the event that's happening. Then it can get very, very specific and give you a very good output. So it depends on how customized and personalized you make.
You mentioned prompt engineering, finding the right words and the right prompts to get the answer we are trying to elicit. But isn't Google also doing the same thing? In the sense, we keep adding key, so we put in login something and some information comes out. We need more, cleaning up of that information or more detail. We change the keyword. We keep on doing that till we get a satisfactory output.
Yeah.
Now, I think prompt engineering shouldn't be very difficult because we've already started doing it in a limited manner for Google.
100%. I think it's a learned skill, right? So it's definitely one of those things where people, once they start interacting with these systems and they have examples of how it can be done, then I'm sure people will be very, very, very creative about it. I'll give you an example. So for my team, we're working on this very complex problem where we have petabytes of data where we extract root cause information from them. So let's say something goes, let's say this screen breaks and somebody fixes that, and like people write an operational log of what they did and so on and so forth. You can do this in aircrafts as well. We wanted to extract root cause information. The first version that we tried extracted everything else, and it wasn't useful. Then we refined and iterated on the prompt. Now the prompt looks like an essay. It is about 600 words because we realized that the more specific and detailed I get, the better the results. Now that works extremely well, right? So we're seeing this trend where it's a learned skill. Now once you start practicing that skill in terms of how do you effectively prompt, how do you write clear instructions versus not, then you will see more better results. We're also seeing cases where GPT responds to positive reinforcement more than negative reinforcement. So, for example, if you that's why you see all my prompts, they start with "you're an excellent something," right? And it effectively, if you remove that and ask it to generate it, it'll give you still a data analyst job description. It's not as good. You say you're an excellent job description writer, it gives you a really good job description. So we're seeing that. Versus if you say, do not make a mistake, it'll inevitably make a mistake. So it's like a 5-year-old child where you have to give it lots of positive reinforcement and very specific instructions, and then it's going to do what you need it to do. For the life of it, do not tell it to not do something, it'll definitely do that.
Hello, sir. Rahul, my name is Pratyush. I'm an assistant professor of sociology here. So thank you first for this nice and I tried my best to understand as far as I could, being from a non-technical background. Well, my question being, I belonging to this sociological backgrounds and social sciences, basically roams around the ethical part, and my apprehensions are on those places. So as far as I understood, these applications are being trained on certain data, and as much rich qualitatively those data are, the application will be as rich. The uses are as rich. Uh, like as far as I see the internet penetration in the world all over, like so, like for now, perhaps it has gone around 70% all over the world, and as far as in India it is concerned, it is around 45 around, right? So obviously, it is being trained on the data which are being generated from the internet users. So I'm coming to the question that what will happen to the epistemological diversities that the world right now, as I see the world right now, there is a big problem so far, the epistemological diversity or plurality that we look on. So as far as I see, yes, it has market potentials, but by trying to be objective, we don't want to be objective all the time. That's where the human comes, and first, that is one thing. Second part of the question would be what happens once it enters into the political and the security issues. It raises a lot of questions there. Question is like where are we right now at the ethical debate here? Like, are we discussing those things? At what level we are discussing those things? Are your orientation, motivations, inspirations only profit or somewhere else as well? Thank you.
So if I were to repeat three parts, so how do we have, how do we think about human objectivity versus AI? Generally, where are we with the ethics conversation around this? And then the second part of the question was around misinformation. Right? So let's talk about the second part first. Right? Misinformation or using AI in the hands of wrong actors is a significant problem. Right? So any of these use cases that I talked about, you can also, just like how you can have, ask it to write a job description of a data analyst, you can ask it to write facts or propaganda for a particular party, against a particular party, against a particular sect of people, a particular caste of people, right? Because just because it's trained on the same set of data, humans have those biases, humans have created that data, so that bias exists in that data, right? Here, for example, you might see certain historical references which might be wrong, or which might propagate a certain point of view. So AI is not immune to any of those biases. So in fact, I don't think we're far along enough on the ethics conversation around these topics. Specifically, how, should there be regulation in terms of who uses AI, what purposes we use it for, right? In terms of what types of data it's trained on, how do we ensure there's bias or lack of bias or additional data control for the bias that already exists. I think it's a tough conversation. I don't think we're having enough researchers like yourself thinking about those topics and advancing thought leadership there. I do know, for example, Google and Meta, they've been thinking about this problem significantly longer, and not just for large language models. They've been thinking about it more generally for moderation and reviews and those types of topics. And they have really large teams that annotate the responses of these models. So for example, if you go to OpenAI or ChatGPT today and go ask it to give you an article that's mildly controversial. For example, if you ask it to talk about whether Israel is a good country or not, right? So the question itself is not offensive, but it will shut down. It will not go down that topic because the initial question is okay, but where it's going to go in terms of the conversation, right? So they have a large team of human annotators that consistently review these responses and then train the model on not responding to these types of queries. There's also toxicity in general in terms of how people, for example, use different words, right? Instead of saying, you might say certain, you might say something against Jews, and that's the clear filter that's banned, right? But you might use a different euphemism. Instead of saying that word, you use something else to refer to it. And you and I know that the model doesn't know it. So they use human annotators to kind of train and catch some of those things. It's an okay solution because it works in the short term. The problem with that solution is the human annotators also have their own bias, right? So they have their own values, they have their own political beliefs, and they're using that to kind of judge the output of these models. So it's a tough conversation. I think we need. I don't think we are as far along as I'd like it to be, but I think the right conversations are happening.
There is no protocol set on.
Yeah, in terms of like, is there a specific protocol that's already developed? No, I think some like these models have been around for like 2-3 years now. There are some techniques, some frameworks on evaluating the bias of a data set, evaluating, they do test runs of these models against these types of questions. So there are objective measures to measure the toxicity of these models, but it's still an evolving field.
Hello, sir. This is Priyank Sharma from the School of Agriculture and Assistant Professor Agribusiness. So I just want to know about that. You mentioned the prompt engineering. So how we can use the prompt engineering to teach our farmers, and moreover, the technology like AI and our Chat GPT, how we can use it for the sustainability food system and supply chains.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So on the sustainability and the supply chain angle, there are lots of interesting cases there, especially around identifying bottlenecks and waste. So where are the biggest, for example, when food goes from a farmer to a mandi to a warehouse to all these things, there's like lots of spillage and wastage along the way. So you can use AI to identify some of those bottlenecks once you give it enough data sets. So that could be an interesting application. In terms of your other question around how do we teach farmers and everybody else to think about prompt engineering, I actually think they shouldn't think about prompt engineering. That's a job for people like you and I to build those solutions where they can naturally converse with the system. So let's say you have today, for example, when you go to YouTube, right, you see a lot of people tap the microphone button, just speak the name of the video that they want to. They're not typing, they're not doing any of those things. We should think about building those types of interfaces for these systems, so that way you don't have to like necessarily learn how to talk to it. You need to build a system that can take the farmer's input based on what they want to do, and then take it.
Ma'am, please have your question.
Hi Rahul, I'm Dr. Niti Tiwari. Actually, I'm working on fake news. That's why my question is from misinformation and disinformation. So, actually, what journalists are manually detecting the fake news or any morphed news, that is morphed pictures are also moving around on the internet. So what I just you must be aware about that during the US presidential election 2016, that is it was a buzzword in which the fake information, misinformation, disinformation came into existence. Is this AI, Chat GPT, what we have just discussed here, able to detect the what journalists are right now currently doing the manually they are detecting? So is it able to detect if any morphed news is there, morphed picture is there, alternative content is there? Is it able to find out that this is the really factual things and this is not the factual things? Okay. Also, what the information it is giving us, we are asking and it is replying back. So might be it is collecting information from the internet, from the various sources. Might be there is the inaccuracy of the data. Might be, it can be that inaccuracy of the data. Then how can we believe that we are getting the actual and the factual information? Actually, factual information. Thank you.
Yeah. So there's a very famous saying in AI generally broadly as well. It's called garbage in, garbage out. So the quality of your models and the output of these models is only as good as the input data. So if the data that it's been trained on is factually inaccurate and problematic, the output will be factually inaccurate and problematic. In fact, we've seen lots of cases when the data itself is factual and correct, the models can hallucinate. It's called hallucinate or just make up facts. So, for example, if I ask for, what is the university's contact number, if it doesn't know, it won't tell you I don't know. You just make up a number based on the fact that it knows you're in Greater Noida, it knows the area code, make up a number. The only way you'll know is by calling it and nobody picks up or somebody else picks up, right? So it's a real problem in terms of inaccuracy. There are techniques to get around that. So, for example, there's a technique called grounding, where you know that these are facts or like these are factual sources of information from elsewhere. Maybe it's like, let's take the case of news, right? Certain publications are more trustworthy than others, and that's based on human judgment, right? So it's not encoded somewhere. So you can use, the output of these models and ground it with those factual sources to get back a factual answer. So some of these things require techniques outside of the model itself, by using things like trust scores, things that you and I know intuitively because we look at, say, a website, we know it's trustworthy or not. Sometimes models aren't able to pick up on those things and we have to teach them for other ways. Or we get the output from them and we compare it to one of these trustworthy sources and then then pass the output if it's reasonably accurate. So those are the ways to get around that problem.
Good afternoon, Rahul. My name is Rohit. I am the Associate Professor for Hospitality Department. So my question is, I actually have two questions. One is, being a faculty, I have a little fear for my students. First question, I'll ask that question first. I did my graduation and my studies when there was no WhatsApp, when there was no mobiles even. But today, how we studied? We followed the path of my teacher. We understood the textbooks. We tried it in the industry and we understood, we got experience. Today, my students are way better than me, but they have the power of AI, which you are providing them. And it's said in a good movie that power comes with a great responsibilities, where responsibility is missing. Why? Whenever I give the assignment to my students, they are very sure, very calm. Nothing will happen, sir, it will be done. How it will be done? When I am very difficult situation when giving you a question, you are very okay that it will be done, sir, at one line. How? Because they know that they have the power of ChatGPT with them, where they don't need to understand the concept, they just need to copy paste it immediately. So my question arises over being a faculty. I am trying them to understand because I am from the hospitality industry where skill-based course we say 75% need to done by hand. So ChatGPT cannot teach you how to cook, how to make like proper sunny side up there, right? So for my students, I'm a little worried that they are very good in theories. Maybe they are getting 100 out of 100. But how will ChatGPT help them in the practice? Because they're not practicing at all. They're very sure that this power help us. So what is your comment on this? That what should students feel? What should I expect the students to do? Am I wrong? If my fear is wrong or not? First question is, or let it be. It will be helpful for them ever again.
This is a very interesting question. I don't think it has been solved. Yeah, you can ask GPT. I don't think it'll give you a solid answer. I'm thinking about it. I've done assignments overnight too, so it's a common problem. Having said that, I think it's interesting, right? So like the broader thing is like how will GPT or like AI kind of influence education? Couple of thoughts there. Like how earlier, like I always disagreed with certain ways certain labs are run in my college, for example, where they would have very mundane things like you copy down your code from this textbook into a data sheet and you get that data sheet signed and then you go write it on that piece of computer. I never understood why you needed to do that. Like that's not what I do at work today. Right? So like, why do I have to go to that? So similarly, I think in this case as well, right? So like, as we see these systems, like we should embrace them in the sense like now you know that that's a tool that every student has access to. So if you give it if you're still giving them the same assignments that they can just like put it into GPT and get an answer back, then that assignment is like probably you do something else. You say, hey, let's go one level deeper, that maybe they still use that tool to accelerate the assignment or give them more complex assignments, right? Instead of like sticking to the same assignment and asking them not to use ChatGPT. I think that just doesn't work. They will find a way around it. Like I have found ways around it. I'm sure you've found ways around your own professors and teachers back in the day. So it's like it's a natural human trait to like do the simplest thing possible. So we just have to redesign some of our curriculum, some of our labs, some of our tests, assuming that people will use this, right? And then change it based on that. So like you're right, there are some practical elements that you will always, you can't do with GPT, so maybe you stress more on that, right? Maybe you test them on the ability to use GPT effectively, right? For example, like giving them like, let's say they're coming with a dish, right? So they come up with like a very effective description of that dish and like how you present it to a customer that's from the south of India versus the north of India. Like how do you make that dish sound appealing to both of them? Maybe that's a task that GPT can help you with, and that's also a unique creative task, right? So where they will use it, but the value there is like them learning how to use it more than like not using it.
So second question, that's very correctly said. I definitely try to change my assignments. So second question on the same end. I'm also a student for university. I'm a scholar. So I am not happy with ChatGPT's answers. I was the first 2 months user when it was launched. I was very happy. The answers were so great. But now the thing has changed that 99% I'm coming in my plagiarism when I'm using ChatGPT Volume 4 even. So it's a kind of complaint to the AI. Something has to be done for the scholars like me, to whom you have make us dependent. Now the things are not working properly. No, I have to work a lot now. Especially with activities now.
It's interesting. That's actually a very common complaint. Lots of people have said that. In fact, OpenAI released a blog post recently. They said like we haven't made the model worse. In fact, it's gotten better. But as people have gotten used to using it, they notice more of these problems before than they did earlier. So you probably got the same answer like when you used it in the first 2 months. It was so mind blowing that you didn't see all the problems. Now you're like, okay, this is normal. So like now you're seeing all the problems with it. So that's the difference.
Rahul, my question is, everybody is a ChatGPT scholar, right?
Yes, of course.
How can we, like, in academics, we depend on a lot of academic texts. It's the system, right? How can we detect this problem? Like, I want to use the technology against the technology. I think that's the best answer for a faculty to do so.
Yeah. So lots of.
Is there any tool for detecting the robotic text or something specific? Or
Yeah, that's
the second question is, suggest me some research tools which we don't know, like which you use personally or incorporates maybe it is like is used or for LMS or teaching learning process you are using.
Yeah. No, that's a great question. So there are plagiarism checkers that can tell you if a particular output has been generated by a model like GPT. There are certain tells, like in the way it phrases sentences or the way it strings together certain concepts. So you can use that. It's not 100% accurate. In fact, if you ask GPT to recorrect it out or like change its output to like pass this plagiarism checker, it'll actually do a good job and pass the plagiarism checker as well. But there are some tools out there, so I recommend kind of Googling for those. And that's a majority of the time, like about 60 to 70% of the times you're able to detect like when it's generated using GPT, unless somebody's done a sophisticated technique. The other thing in terms of like what are the other tools that I recommend looking into? So I recommend looking into Anthropic and Cloud and POE. Cloud is CLAUDE and Anthropic is ANTHROPIC. So these are all alternative large language models, and they have slightly different names. So some of them, for example, Anthropic is very good at citations. So ChatGPT will give you an answer but doesn't bother to tell you where it's from. Anthropic is very, very good at citing specific sources. So it cites specific papers, cites specific articles, so you can like verify the source of that answer really well. So it's usually very good for like research and academic settings. So you can use that tool to answer questions. It also is connected to the internet, so it can explain websites and papers and give you a good answer.
Thank you.
He asked you, how can I find out whether it is a ChatGPT stuff that has come to me or there's something original. The very simple way I do it is I look at the background of the person, the earlier stuff he or she used to give me, and the current stuff, and I know this is it. And honestly, after that, I've gone to ChatGPT, put in some of my version of prompt engineering, and I got the same answers. I said, okay, this is from here. So that, as a faculty, you will be able to find out very, very easily, because this guy has not been turning up such wonderful flower inventions until he or she does.
And ChatGPT's English also sounds very 1980s England. Yeah. Yeah, it's like perfect English. Nobody speaks like that with the exception of Shashi Tharoor.
Okay, yeah, we are running out of time, so we are just going to have one question from the faculty and one question from the students.
Sounds good.
Hi Rahul, this is Dr. Shivangi from our department. You introduced this AI and ChatGPT in various ways where it can be used in law for processing the data and analyzing the cases. My question is that the very, the integrity of the data which lawyers analyzes lies in the final outcome and the crux which he gives to his client. So the question is actually, the accountability of the information you're giving out of this ChatGPT using AI. Who will be the accountable? This is actually the most debatable topic nowadays in legal fraternity. So this is actually because as you've told about Harvey, I think it's working on this. So even still they're working. So is there any policies which the company is already coming up? Because there's a question already asked regarding plagiarism checking and copyright issues which we're facing using the data from AI. So a quick answer on this, though you have answered all the questions, but accountability is again a major issue here.
Yeah. So the way I would recommend thinking about it is like the majority of applications today should be in terms of augmenting a human. So think of it as an AI intern or an AI junior who's doing a lot of the manual administrative work for you, reading the briefs, looking up, doing some prima facie like precedent research. So you want AI to do that for you, and ultimately you as a human, as the lawyer, as the expert, are reviewing that output and seeing if it's applicable for your particular case or for your particular task. So I wouldn't recommend thinking of GPT as like, instead of like say Harish Salve now, it's like Chat GPT going and like fighting the case. That's not the right way to think about it. It's more about a co-pilot or an assistant to augment existing lawyers' work. So in that case, the accountability would lie with the lawyer that's using that tool. Right? So it's just like how if you make a spelling error in your brief, that accountability is with you. It's the same thing here as well. Like the art is in using it effectively, so you can now do so much more. Now you can go back home at 7 p.m. instead of at 11 because you've done with your work.
Hi sir, my name is Daksh Arora. I am a last year student of BTech CSE AI/ML. So my question is like how ChatGPT manages to fetch such a vast amount of data in just few seconds. Like it has a particular database or it like scraps from the web.
Yeah. So when ChatGPT is answering your questions, it's actually just answering it from that model architecture. If you remember that slide, all those parameters, it's literally going against that and then answering the question directly. It's not scraping any database or like scraping any website to give you that. So that's why it's fast, because it's all hosted in memory, which is why it's like extremely fast.
How like so much amount of data is stored on like it's on a particular server or like there are so many servers?
Yeah. It's stored on a very large set of servers, basically like a whole set of distributed servers. So much so that I think it costs over OpenAI nearly like about, it cost them about like $500 million, something like that, to train this model, or like maybe not $500 million, maybe $100 million to train this model. And every day it's running still like a significant expense to run.
And so in the developing stage, like how developers get that data, like in the developing stage, how they feed data, how they fine tune the things, like they get from the web sources, like how they get original data.
Yeah. So, couple of things. I recommend looking at the OpenAI documentation. So they talk about how you can train and fine-tune models very clearly. So essentially, you create your own data set through whatever approach that you want. Like maybe you have a set of documents that you want to train the model on, and then you use their fine-tuning APIs to go to that. And there's a very specific way in which you can run those jobs as well. So if you read through their documentation, it's like very clearly specified there in terms of how you think.
Last question, sir. So a few days ago, I was trying some aptitude questions. I was unable to solve those questions. When I asked from ChatGPT, it was producing wrong answers. When I asked my friend to solve, he was doing it correct. And when I asked from other web sources, he was also producing like the web sources were also producing correct results. But ChatGPT was producing wrong results for three questions, and it was like I don't know what logic it was applying. So why it was happening? Like it is very bad now. Like someone is asking question and it is producing wrong answers.
Yeah.
So why it was happening?
Yeah. So ChatGPT doesn't know what's right or wrong. It just makes up things. So it just tells you whatever it knows. 90% of the times it's right. So you think it's always right. So that's our problem, that we think that's always correct. So in this case, what I recommend is, if you run into a problem where ChatGPT is saying the wrong answer, simply tell ChatGPT, I think you're wrong. Can you change your answer? It will actually change it because it doesn't know.
Sir, I have asked it to regenerate the response, but still it was giving wrong
Don't
answers.
click on the button. Don't click on the button. Type a response.
I have tried it. I have tried it. No, sir.
Got it. So,
Okay, thank you.
Wasn't typing the right in the right direction. Maybe it's of prompt engineering.
Likely, yeah. So it depends on what the input data is.
Honestly, this was one of the best sessions attended by all of us in the recent times. Our highly intellect speaker, Mr. Rahul Kayala, analyzed the diversity of the audience, and he maintained the legibility and feasibility very well. And he tried to, encapsulate the vast topic of AI and LLM in one single session. And he took excellent examples to understand the application. Me being from the area of mass communication has certain takeaways like copywriting for website, then sentiment analysis, translation. Likewise, I'm very sure that everyone over here have taken something novel from this session. We are indeed had a very interesting Q&A session, and I had to stop because there were questions floating. So on behalf of Honorable Director Operation Madam, Advisor to Chancellor Madam, Vice Chancellor Sir, and all HODs, Deans, faculty members and students of Galgotias University, I thank Mr. Rahul Kayala for accepting our invitation and giving your valuable time. And we definitely look forward to have a stronger association in future too with you. So thank you everyone. Mariji, can we have a group photograph? I request all the dignitaries to please come up on the stage and have a group photograph with our distinguished guest and guest of honor. So, and I request deans and HODs also to please join for a group photograph.
वहाँ जाना तो यहाँ क्यों आ रहा है? मैंने देखा इसका वो कैमरा जूम कर देते हैं, कैमरा थोड़ा जूम कर देते हैं, उनसे बोले कैमरा
Thank you so much, all the audience for joining us, and the students and the co-anchor.